So I did the best on test 4, so I think we should go over anything but test 4.
Okay. Let's start on the first one. How did you do overall?
On which one?
I don't know. On the quiz you took yesterday.
87.
Pretty good. Do we want to just start at the beginning here?
Sure.
What are we going to do here? We have a couple of options.
You want to bring the bottom up to the top?
No, that's not really one of them.
Factor.
The options are, well, we could try factoring it. That's never a bad first attempt. Factor the top.
Take out an x, so it'd be x times x plus 3.
So factoring it didn't really help. Can't cancel anything. One thing we could do is the long division. In other words, this is a division problem. So we could do it like this. Let's do it this way. Let's make sure you know how to do this method. What's your first step?
How many of those terms go into that? It'd be 2.
Well, your first step is always to divide that into that only. What is that?
2.
No. X squared divided by x.
No, x.
Okay. Now your next step is to take that and multiply it by both terms and proceed with long division, just like you were working with numbers. So multiply x times both of these terms.
X squared minus x.
Now subtract, because in long division you're always subtracting. Synthetic division you're always adding. But we're doing long division here. So we want to subtract. What do you get when you subtract these two terms? This always goes to 0. Otherwise, you did your division wrong.
So it'd be 4x.
Now repeat.
And times 4.
Well, x goes into 4x plus 4 times. Multiply it down. And you get a remainder of 4. That's a plus 4. So you get 4 divided by x minus 1. So that's the answer we get when we do the division, which isn't a very pretty answer. I'm not sure that helps. It might. But let's look at the second way to do this, which would be to back solve. In other words, let's go through each of these answers and figure out if they make sense. First of all, does x equals 0 equal a solution? Plug it in.
No.
Plug it in.
This would be 0 over 1 over negative 1.
What is 0 over negative 1?
0, yeah.
Okay, so it does work. About minus 3.
No, it doesn't work.
You got minus 3 squared
Oh, minus 3, yeah, it does work.
in parentheses plus a 3 times a minus 3. Again, you get a numerator of 0. That's all you need to make this thing 0. So that works. Now, x equal 1. Does that work?
Well, it'd make the thing not exist, right?
That doesn't work. In other words, you're correct. You can't have it non-existing. So, in other words, that works, that works, that does not. So that helps us. That means that's not correct because we found 2 solutions that do work. Ooh, nope, that's not it. That looks like it's it. Has to be. And we learned all of that by trying the one that was the most complex. In other words, when I look at this thing, there's 3 solutions here. Every other answer only had 2 or 1. So let's start with the 3 and see if we can figure out which ones are, which ones aren't. If all 3 of them are, that's our answer. We're done. But if only 2 are, and we know that those 2 are, then we look elsewhere to see, well, what other answer has those 2 solutions? And notice that that was pretty much a waste of time, but I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know that it wouldn't go in there evenly. And if it went in there evenly, then it would have been real easy to solve. The fact that it was not a factor, in other words, x minus 1 is not a factor of the numerator, that was worthless. Didn't help us, I don't think. No, even knowing the answer being D, it doesn't make any sense to what we came up with. So sometimes you need 2 ways to do a problem. Hold on. Oh my goodness. Can we back solve this?
Not really.
No,
I think.
right, we can't. I could certainly plug in the solutions they give, but that doesn't tell us whether it satisfies that inequality at all. I only know one way to do these problems, Zach, so let's talk about it. It's called drawing a line chart. Let's start with this. If I had this alone, how would I solve it?
Foil it.
No. So when I say I like answers in factored format, it's because of problems like this. Sometimes you need them in factored format.
So you just solve for each y?
Nope. This is not an equation. This is an equality. So you need to do a line chart. Whenever you have a product or a quotient of 2 things, like this is a product, and it is an inequality with 0 on the other side, which is almost always the case, you do a line chart. Not an XY coordinate grid, but a line chart. And the first step is to determine your critical points. What are they?
6 and 3/5. Negative 3/5.
Good. And I put both of those points on my line chart. I do not put 0 on there. I don't want 0 on there. Now, the next step is to pick a number to the left of your furthest most critical point. Pick the simplest number you can think of.
0.
Got to be to the left.
0. Oh, -1.
Okay. Plug in -1. What's the left term become? Negative or positive?
Negative.
How about the right term?
Negative.
Multiply the negative times the negative, you get a positive. That is greater than 0. That means every point to the left of -3/5 is going to be positive. I only needed one to know that all of them would be positive. Now pick a point in the middle.
Be negative in the middle.
Pick a point between -3/5 and 6.
0.
Plug it in. What's the left expression become? Positive or negative? That's the only thing I care about. I don't care about what the number is. I just care about its sign. How about the right expression?
Negative.
Positive times a negative is a negative. That means it's negative everywhere in that interval. Now pick a number greater than 6.
10.
Makes that positive and that positive. That makes it positive all the way out to infinity. There's your solution to this problem. In other words, where is it greater than 0? It's greater than 0 from -infinity to -3/5 in combination with 6 to infinity. There's your solution to the problem I just gave you, which is a beginner slope problem. What they're asking us is a intermediate slope problem. So let's up it up a notch. Get rid of everything I don't need here. I still have those two critical points. Now I have a y squared. Are there any additional critical points?
0.
Draw my line chart. I mark all 3 critical points this time. I mark 6, I mark 0, and I mark -3/5. Doesn't really matter if I draw it to scale as long as they're all in the right order. Pick a number to the left of -3/5.
-1 still.
Okay, what's that give you? That was negative and that was negative the first time. What about the y squared? Okay, what is that?
Negative. Or I mean positive. Positive.
Okay, so it's positive everywhere to the left of 3/5. Now pick a number between 3/5 and 0.
-1/2.
-1/2. Correct?
Yep.
If you're not sure, pick -1/10. I mean, this is -6/10. So all you got to do is find a point between 0 and minus 3/5. Minus 1/2 is such a point, but what did you pick? Minus 1/2?
Yeah.
Okay. Square it. Is it positive or negative?
Positive.
About the second part, 5y plus 3. Is that positive or negative?
Positive.
And how about the last part?
It'd be negative.
Okay, so it's negative in that interval. Pick a number between 0 and 6.
5.
Pick a simpler number.
1.
Good. Always use 0 and 1 if you can. Okay, what's y squared?
Positive.
What's 5y plus 3?
Positive.
What's y minus 6?
Negative.
So we're negative in that whole interval. And we've already figured out that when we're to the right of 6, it's positive. So now we have our solution. Now I guess, well, which answer is it? You tell me.
D.
Correct. Now, if I had been particularly clever, I would have realized that that is always positive. So it never changes your answer. In fact, I could have done the entire problem based on this alone. Now, I accidentally did that, but it wasn't because I was smart. It's just I wanted you to start with an easy problem instead of starting with a problem that was the product of 3 things. I wanted to start with something that was the product of only 2 things. But now that I look at the problem afterwards, I realize that we didn't really have to put that as a critical point. In other words, had I come up with the solution to just that part, because that's always positive, because it's a number being squared, it doesn't change any of our previous solutions. So I actually was able to solve the entire problem with just looking at those 2. Although I didn't know it at the time. I was just, like I said, starting with something easier. Now, I don't believe, might be wrong, but I'm not sure that one could back solve. In other words, could you take that? Well, you'd have to start with that. I don't know how to take that solution and see if it works. Well,
I don't think you can.
well, hold on. There is something I want to mention here. That is a single x and y coordinate. It's not an interval. Well, I guess it is an interval. It's saying from minus 3/5 to 6. Okay. All right. I thought that they were trying to trick us here. They only have 2 answers that are intervals, and that's C and D. So if you knew that it was an interval, you could guess between C and D if you didn't know what it was. Tell me something. What is our answer?
D.
Tell me what the difference between C and D is.
The parentheses.
So, can it be 6? D says it can be 6.
I think, yeah, it can be.
Now, 36, 33, 0. Is that greater than 0?
No.
cannot be D. The answer is C. Got to be very careful. They're very tricky. When you first told me D, I said, oh yeah, that looks right. It agrees with everything. But then when I started looking at all the answers, it looked to me like C was the same as D. And I finally found the difference and realized usually if you're looking at a greater than sign and it's not a greater than or equal, then everything's going to be parentheses. If you're looking at a greater than or equal, then you might have a bracket next to the 3/5 and you might have a bracket next to the 6. That's usually the quick and dirty way of telling. Here we're looking at a greater than sign only. That means we should be looking at 4 parentheses at best. How do I solve this?
Make it equal to 0.
How about let's write it without a negative coefficient. There's nothing wrong with your solution. In other words, your solution says this. Now you got to solve that, but that's not that easy to solve either. So let's start. Whenever you see a negative exponent, usually you want to convert that to a positive exponent. So how do I write this equation using positive exponents only?
It'd be 1 over 4y squared.
The 4 is in the numerator. It's not in the denominator. In other words, the negative 2 does not apply to the 4. It only applies to the y. See the difference? In other words, I didn't have parentheses there. If I'd have had parentheses, then the negative 2 would have applied to the 4, and it would have ended up in the denominator also. But without parentheses, the 4 is in the numerator. Now, next step.
Subtract y to both sides.
You got a variable in a denominator. You don't like that. How do you get it out of the denominator?
Multiply each side by y squared.
What's that give you?
Y cubed equals 4.
Now how do you solve for y?
Take the cube root of both sides.
So what's the answer?
Cube root 4.
Which letter?
A.
Now, before we leave this
Technically,
problem,
C would work too, right?
No, C wouldn't work. Because C requires y to be 0, and you cannot divide by 0. Furthermore, 4 divided by 0 is not 0. It's infinity. So that's definitely not a solution for 2 different reasons. Now, you might think that, wow, I see a plus and a minus. I'm always missing the plus and minus. Could that be the answer? When you're dealing with cube roots, it's not plus and minus. When I solve this problem right here, my answer is plus or minus 2. When I solve this problem right here, my answer is plus 2 only. So when you're taking cube roots, you don't usually have a plus and a minus. Or if you're taking a fifth root. In other words, whenever that's an odd number, you don't have this plus and minus. Whenever this is an even number, you always do. Well, since we're taking the cube root of y, we don't expect to have a plus and minus. And indeed, we don't. That's why A is the answer. Wow. Solve for B. Okay, that helps. So the first thing we have to do if we're going to solve for B. And this is pretty important. That first step. You can't even begin this problem without knowing this. What the first thing to do to solve for B?
You have to bring like both sides to one, or both of them to one side.
Yes. Every term that has B in it needs to be together on one side. Every term that does not have B in it needs to be left on the other side. So what's the next line to this equation? Am I going to take everything to the right, or am I going to take everything to the left? By everything, I mean the terms with B in them.
Take them to the left.
Okay, what's that leave?
7 on the right.
What's it leave on the left?
4a squared b minus 5ab.
And it leaves 7 on the right. Now notice what I can do to solve for B. Always think factoring. When you don't know what to do and you don't know what step to do, think factoring. Now, what's the greatest common factor? What's the greatest common factor between these two terms?
It'd be a b.
Correct. But we don't want that. We want just B. Can we factor out just B, leaving no B's behind? What is left if I factor out a B? When you factor out a B, what are you doing? You're dividing each term by B. So divide the first term by B, what do you have?
Just 4a squared b, or no, just 4a squared.
Divide the second term by B, what do you have?
Minus 5a.
Now solve for B. Better yet, tell me what the answer is.
B, what, 7b equals 4a squared minus 5a.
Okay, let's go back to this step. Solve that for B.
So it'd be 7 divided by 4a squared minus 5a.
Now tell me what the answer is. A, B, C, D, or E?
E.
Has to be. It's the only one that has 7 in the numerator. And even though our denominator is not exactly the same, we can see what they did. They factored out an A. That's the same denominator as we got. But as long as we do the math fully, in other words, take it to its completion, then immediately you see that E can be the only answer. It's the only one that has a 7 in the numerator. Are all your tests multiple choice?
This one, yes, every single thing on this test is going to be multiple choice.
Okay. We're going to do this.
Well, we could factor it, or I mean not factor it, FOIL it, and then might subtract or add the 3 to both sides.
Like that. Let's do it. What do you get?
Be 5x squared plus 10x.
Don't multiply in random order like that. When you're multiplying these two things, do that times that, and then finish the x. Do that times that. Next, go to the right, you run into a 2, do that times that, and then do that times that. Always stay in the same exact order. Don't just randomly do it, because if I give you a trinomial by a trinomial, randomly doing it is going to get you in big trouble. You want to have a pattern as to how you do these. That's why they teach you FOIL, really. It's to establish the fact that you're going to go in a certain order every time. As much as I don't like FOIL, I prefer ET. The advantage of FOIL is it does tell you the order to go in. It doesn't, it's not just every term by every term. It's do it in this order. So what's the next term?
To be minus 1x.
Next term?
It'd be 10x.
Do need the sign. It's plus 10x. If I leave that plus out, this thing has no meaning. In other words, the only sign I can leave out is the sign in front of the first term. If that's a plus, I don't need to put it in. Everything else I do. What's the last term?
Minus 2.
Okay. Now, combine everything. What do we got? Do what you said. Move the minus 3 over.
Plus 10x minus 5. Or plus 9x minus 5.
Not minus 5. You said it before. No. You said add 3 to both sides.
Plus 1.
That's going to be factorable. No way. And the reason I say that is the best I can do is 5x and x, and it's got to be plus plus, and it's got to be 1, 1. There's no way I can reach 9. So it does not factor, and I can recognize it instantly, which tells me this can't be right, because that answer comes from factoring. But the other 4 answers come from using the quadratic formula. So, you got to know the quadratic. Tell me the quadratic formula. whenever you cannot factor a quadratic, the quadratic formula is your solution of last resort. Do you know it?
I'm trying to think about it.
Remember, part of it is minus b over 2a. That gives you a big part of it, which also happens to be the solution to the vertex of a quadratic. So start with minus b. Now what comes next?
Isn't it 4AC or something?
Well, you're close. Plus or minus. Then there's a radical sign, and it's b squared minus 4ac. The whole thing is divided by 2a. That's why I said think of that minus b over 2a. That helps a lot when you're trying to remember the quadratic. I wish I had a way of helping you memorize it. I don't have any song. It's a good thing somebody came up with a song to learn the ABCs, otherwise I might not have ever learned them. To this day, if you ask me which comes first, I or J, I have to in my head go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K. Okay. I know it. Okay. I've run into students that say they have been taught a song to memorize this.
Yeah, it went like
Well,
x is equal to opposite b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
okay. I thought you were going to sing it to me.
I just couldn't remember the song.
The tune?
Well, like I know the tune, I just couldn't remember it until I saw the formula.
Well, that's a good way to memorize stuff, if you can put it to a song. But you got to memorize the tune. In other words, well, or I don't know. When you just read it back, I don't know if you were reading what I have on the screen or you were actually recalling from memory. So the next step is the last one. This is going to tell us what the answer is. Let's fill everything in. What's minus b?
It'd be minus 9.
It's b squared minus 4ac.
Be 81 minus 5 times 1, so 1, or so 5.
So 81 minus 20. So that's 61. And it's all over what?
2a, or 10.
Tell me the answer. There's a 2 under the E. Answer E, that's a 2 in the denominator.
So it'd be b.
It has to be. In fact, I don't know that I really like suggesting this, but the moment you discover minus 9, oh, you know it's either B or D, right? You can eliminate C and E immediately. Now the only question is what's inside the radical, 101 or is it 61? In this particular problem, I think that kind of analysis is not worth the time. It really isn't. You should just straight out solve it using the quadratic, and whatever answer you get, look and see if you find that, and if you do, that's it. And again, this is a fairly difficult problem. This is not easy algebra. This would definitely be higher level stuff. I don't have any leeway at all here. I got to go at 3. So if I go over, remind me.
Okay.
What's our starting spot for a problem like this? It talks about circles. I say it every time. Not so much to you, but I say it to every student. You've got to start with the general formula for a circle. If you don't know the general formula for a circle, you really can't solve this. Not in a short period of time. If you know the general formula for a circle, it's a piece of cake.
Isn't it 2 pi r?
No, I'm talking about conic sections. The formula for a circle is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals the radius squared, where h and k are the center. So right off the get-go, we know that, well, they're telling us the center. So what's the fill in everything that I know?
It'd be, so x minus 2 and plus y minus, or no, I guess it'd be plus 4.
Have they told us the radius?
We can plug in the next point for the radius.
Exactly. In other words, they have not. So right offhand, I see a bunch of answers that look like what we have. In other words, those two could be right. They got at least the left side of the equation correct, but I don't know what the radius is. But I can solve for it because I know that the circle goes through that point. So that will allow me to solve for the radius. How? I have this equation with 3 variables. I know what 2 of them have to be. 0 and minus 8. That will allow me to solve for the third one that I'm trying to figure out, which is r. So plug in the point that we know the circle goes through. And when I say that, I mean the circumference, not the center. We're not inside the circle. But when it says passes through the point, that means the circumference of the circle goes through this point. That means that the x and y coordinates of this point have to satisfy the equation. So plug in 0 for x and minus 8 for y.
Should be 20.
Step by step, tell me what the next line reads. I can't, when you skip a step, I can't figure out whether it's correct or not.
So that'd be 2 squared, which would be 4. And then plus, that'd be 4 inside squared would be 16.
Be negative 4 inside, but nonetheless, negative 4 squared is 16. So, which is the correct answer? Is it A or B? Or none of these?
Be A.
Correct. So we really had to solve it out. In other words, I don't think there was a shortcut to doing everything we did. But the key to this problem is to know the general equation. If you don't know these general equations, Zach, make up a set of index cards for yourself. And on one side, say circle. On the other side, put that general equation. And make a note that h is the x coordinate of the center, and k is the y coordinate of the center, and r is the radius of the circle. But you got to memorize these. Otherwise, there's no way to do that problem. Simple algebraic equation. What's difficult about it is the variable that we're trying to solve for, w, is way over here hidden. It's a denominator to a number that's being taken the square root of multiplied by 4 over pi. So, how do we solve this for w? Step by step, not all at once.
Well, you divide by 4 pi to both sides.
Give me the next line.
And then you square both sides.
Okay, let's do it. I'm not going to be able to pick from one of these answers unless we do it. I mean,
Okay, so it'd be,
agreed that you need to know how to do it, but give me the next line.
so it'd be L pi divided by 4, and then equals square root of 3 divided by w.
Yeah, do these one step at a time. Okay, keep going.
And then you square both sides.
So what's that give me?
L squared times pi squared over 16
Equals.
3 over w.
Now what?
Now you multiply each side by 1/3.
Most people here would multiply or cross multiply. Okay, in other words, they would multiply 16 by 3, and then multiply w by that, and then they would divide both sides by L squared pi squared to solve for w. And I actually like that way of doing it. Let's just stick with cross multiplication. I was going to give you an easier solution. Maybe I'll mention it. Okay, right? That's cross multiplying. Now what's w? What's the answer? How many of the answers have 48 in the numerator?
1.
Exactly. That has to be the answer. I don't care what else. We know that when we solve for w, everything here goes in the denominator. So our answer has to have 48 in the numerator all by itself. Now, here's what I was tempted to say. And in the interest of giving you multiple ways of solving problems, I'm going to say it. If this is true, then I can flip both of them, and it's still true. Now, the advantage of doing that is that now it's much easier to solve for w. Now w is just 3 times that all over that. So we get the same answer, but it's quite a bit easier. We don't have to go through that whole cross multiplication and dividing both sides by L squared pi squared. By flipping them, we get to the answer much quicker. As long as I have a fraction equals another fraction, if I say 1 over x equals 2 over y, then also x over 1 has to equal y over 2. You can always do that. When you have one fraction equals another, you can flip them and they're still equal. As long as you flip both of them. what am I going to do with 8?
You're gonna solve for. Are you gonna plug in k into 2? Or
What if I asked you this? Whoops, hold on. I've got to take a picture of it. What if I said, what is f of 4? What would you do?
plug in 4 for t.
Okay. That's what you always do. So if I substitute something other than 4, what are you going to do?
Substitute it for t.
Okay, so tell me what to write.
3 times k minus 2 squared.
Keep going.
Then minus 2.
Yeah, I still need that minus 2. In other words, is all I'm doing is taking whatever's inside the parentheses and plugging it in for t. Okay. Now, they don't give us this as one of the answers. So clearly we have to expand it. In fact, every answer they give us has a k squared in it, so we're definitely going to have to expand it. So expand this. We expand first.
So it'd be 3 times k minus 2 times k minus 2. That thing? Or?
Correct. Do this first. Do the exponentials first. So what does that give you? What's k minus 2 times k minus 2?
K squared minus 2k minus 2k again, plus 4.
I'd like to see you memorize the quick way of doing that instead of having to FOIL it. There is a quick way. I've tried to teach it to you before. Not that important, I suppose, other than it saves you 20 or 30 seconds. Now simplify this. What do we got? In other words, here's the quick way. Hold on a second. As long as I made a comment, let me back it up. That's a squared minus 2ab plus b squared, always, no matter what a and b are. So if I'm squaring k minus 2, then it's k squared minus 2 times 2, 4k plus 4. That's the quick way of doing it, as opposed to FOILing it. And you got to memorize a minus b squared, and a plus b squared is the same thing, only it's plus 2ab. Once you memorize those two, you'll be able to use it and save 20 seconds when doing these problems. Now, normally I tell people in the 9th grade, memorize these because you'll have to do it 100 times between now and college. So what's the bottom line answer here? Simplify what's inside the parentheses first.
So it'd be just k minus 4k plus 4.
Now what? Because that answer isn't on there either.
Multiply the 3 and
Okay, what do you get?
3k squared minus 12k plus 12. I guess you could just make it plus 10.
An answer on there?
No.
None of those. In other words, none of these is the answer. And the only way you can find it is by doing the math all the way to the end. There are no shortcuts. I can't get halfway through and see that, wow, boy, I get to that step, therefore that must be the answer. Well, that wasn't the answer. There was still that minus 2 you had to add to it. So it needs to be a 10. Now, it is possible that we made a math error, but even looking at it again, I don't see it. So I'm pretty sure the answer you came up with was the correct. All right, Zach, let's stop there. And try to remember, or I'll remember, whatever, that we got through 8 of test 1.
Okay.
I usually can remember. All right. Have a good rest of your week, and I'll talk to you next time.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.